Around midnight, both being unable to sleep, they decide to go somewhere more sheltered, as Hermione says she thought she heard someone moving nearby outside the range of their protective charms. This was actually Ron, as we'll learn in a bit. They disapparate to another location. When Harry asks where they are, Hermione tells him it's the Forest of Dean, and that she went camping here with her parents once. The movie actually adds a nice little monologue for her here, which I like.
It's just how I remember it. The trees, the river, everything. Like nothing's changed. Not true, of course, everything's changed. If I brought my parents back here now, they probably wouldn't recognize any of it. Not the trees, not the river, not even me.
That's a nice addition. However, that aside, there is a bit of an issue here. Remember when I said that the absence of Phineas Nigellus's portrait in the movie would raise an unanswered question? Well, here's where that comes up. You see, when Hermione tells Harry where they are, she has already opened her bag to get the tent poles out. Because of that, Phineas, who was in the bag, heard her and reported their location to Snape. That's how Snape knew where they were to deliver the sword to them. However, in the movie, Phineas's portrait isn't with them, which raises the question, how the hell did Snape know where they were? Anyway, one night while Harry is keeping watch, something approaches, a doe-shaped Patronus. For a moment, Harry is completely mesmerized by it. Harry stared at the creature, filled with wonder, not at her strangeness, but at her inexplicable familiarity. He felt that he had been waiting for her to come, but that he had forgotten until this moment that they had arranged to meet. His impulse to shout for Hermione, which had been so strong a moment ago, had gone. He knew he would have staked his life on it, that she had come for him and him alone. Caution murmured, it could be a trick, a lure, a trap. But instinct, overwhelming instinct, told him that this was not dark magic. He set off in pursuit. I like how that gives context as to why Harry would follow her. Even he can't explain it, but he just knows he has to. And of course, the reason he finds her familiar is because of his mother, as we later learn. This is another one of those moments where the advantage of the literary medium shines through, pun intended, as it's not very clear in the movie why he's so willing to follow her. Especially after he so recently got screwed over by following someone. Not that that's the movie's fault, of course. Again, it's just a disadvantage of the medium, as we lose the narration. In any event, he follows her to a frozen lake where, to his shock and confusion, he sees the sword of Gryffindor lying on the bottom. Harry does initially try to use a summoning charm to bring the sword to him, despite knowing it couldn't be that easy. Give him credit for at least making sure. As Dumbledore said back in Chamber of Secrets,
"It would take a true Gryffindor to pull that out of the hat."
In other words, in order to wield the sword, Harry has to demonstrate his bravery by jumping into an ice-cold, frozen lake in winter to grab it. The movie doesn't really explain this, but that's the whole reason it was put in the lake and not just left on the ground for Harry to pick up. Random thought, but I've always kind of wondered what Snape is thinking the whole time he's watching Harry here. I should have known Potter would be too dense to figure this out. Of course summoning it won't work. Why do you think it's in the lake, idiot boy? Just go ahead and jump in already. I don't want to stay here any longer than I have to. What's wrong, Potter? I thought Gryffindors were supposed to be brave. Fortunately, Harry is like the ultimate Gryffindor, so after only a moment's hesitation, he strips down and jumps in. Unfortunately, the Horcrux around his neck, sensing the thing that can destroy it, begins to strangle him. Ugh, and now Potter's drowning. Can't he even swim properly? Am I really going to have to go in and rescue him? Fortunately, someone does save him, and grabs the sword.
He meant to.
Yay, Ron's back! I do feel like Harry is a bit too nonchalant about it in the movie. In the book, he's naturally completely dumbfounded to see Ron, unsure whether he's real or not, and even thinking he might disappear if he looks away too long. For a moment, Harry is even conflicted about how he feels about Ron, remembering how they parted, but the fact that Ron just saved his life seems to balance that out in his mind. They work out that whoever cast the Patronus must have put the sword in the lake for them to find, and then set about destroying it. Since Ron was the one who actually got the sword out of the lake, Harry tells Ron he should do it.
I can't handle it.
Nothing affects me more than it affects you and Hermione.
All the more reason.
No, I can't.
Then why are you here? Why did you come back?
This part then plays out pretty much the same as in the book. Harry opens the locket by speaking Parseltongue, and the piece of Voldemort's soul inside it fights back by playing on all of Ron's fears and insecurities. In particular, his feelings of inadequacy, which has been his biggest struggle throughout the series.
We were better without you. Happier without you.
Who could look at you compared to Harry Potter?
Your mother confessed she would have preferred me as a son.
You are nothing compared to him.
Fortunately, Ron isn't taken in by it and at long last destroys the Horcrux. In the movie, this is followed by this line from him.
Just think. Only 3 to go.
Amusing, yeah, but not necessarily the appropriate response to what just happened. In the book, Ron falls to his knees shaking, and Harry goes over to comfort him, assuring him that what the Horcrux said was not true. They were not better off without him. Hermione couldn't stop crying. She and Harry could barely speak to each other at times. They got nothing accomplished. Ron may not be the smartest or most talented of the trio, but they were completely lost without him. Harry also clarifies his relationship with Hermione to Ron, explaining that he loves her like a sister. Ron apologizes for leaving, leading to this cool exchange. You've sort of made up for it tonight. Getting the sword, finishing off the Horcrux, saving my life. That makes me sound a lot cooler than I was. Stuff like that always sounds cooler than it really was. I've been trying to tell you that for years. Which is true. Harry's always said that his accomplishments aren't as impressive as people make them out to be, and now Ron understands how it feels. So they return to the tent, and Hermione, well, she proceeds to beat the crap out of Ron, which, fair enough, don't let him off too easy. I will say, she is much more subdued in the movie than in the book, where she's downright hysterical, almost demented. Ron tells them what happened to him after he left. The book, of course, goes into a bit more detail. He wanted to come back pretty much as soon as he left, but immediately ran into a group of snatchers who thought he was a muggle-born in hiding. Thankfully, they weren't very bright, and he managed to get away, but by the time he apparated back to their campsite, Harry and Hermione were gone. Then, he says, he heard Hermione's voice coming from the Deluminator, saying his name. There is a bit of an inconsistency in the movie here, as Hermione didn't say Ron's name at any point after they left Godric's Hollow, unless it was off-screen, which I guess it could have been. In the book, she said his name after showing Harry his broken wand and reminding him of how Ron's wand couldn't be repaired after it broke. That was the first time either of them had said Ron's name after he left. So basically, for the Deluminator to show Ron the way back, not only did he have to want to come back, but Harry and Hermione had to be at a point where they wanted him back. And when they were willing to say his name again, that was the time. They also, of course, tell Hermione their story of seeing the Silver Doe, which led them to the sword, and how they destroyed the Horcrux. As Hermione examines the destroyed Horcrux, Harry tells Ron about his wand being destroyed, and Ron gives him a wand he took from one of the snatchers he escaped. In the movie, this happens in the scene after this. Hermione, though still furious with Ron, doesn't beat him up any further, but simply goes back to bed, which, as Harry says, is the best he could hope for. So, right after Harry hit his lowest point and completely lost hope, suddenly Ron comes back, they find the sword, and they destroy a Horcrux. Suddenly, things look a lot brighter, and there's an actual path forward. This is where things start to get better for the trio. And I love how it was a doe, a representation of Lily, who was the one to originally save Harry by sacrificing herself, that leads them to this renewed hope. And of course, there's the added irony of it being Snape, one of the people they hate the most, who's behind it. The next day, Hermione continues to not talk to Ron and just throws him dirty looks. Harry and Ron go off on their own to talk and fill each other in on everything that's happened to them. This, in the book, is where Ron informs Harry about the taboo on Voldemort's name, allowing the Death Eaters to track down anyone who says it. Apparently they almost caught Kingsley this way, but he escaped and is now on the run. They theorize on who could have sent the doe, with Ron suggesting Kingsley, but as Harry points out, Kingsley's Patronus is a lynx. Ron then suggests, somewhat desperately, that it might have been Dumbledore, as he had the real sword last. Harry did not laugh at Ron, because he understood too well the longing behind the question. The idea that Dumbledore had managed to come back to them, that he was watching over them, would have been inexpressibly comforting. He shook his head. Dumbledore's dead. I saw it happen. I saw the body. He's definitely gone. Anyway, his Patronus was a phoenix, not a doe. Patronuses can change, though, can't they? Tonks has changed, didn't it? Unbeknownst to him, Ron has actually stumbled on something here. This was someone whose Patronus changed due to love, like Tonks's. It just wasn't Dumbledore. They continue to discuss Dumbledore and his reasons for leaving the items in his will, leading to this interaction that I really like. I don't know. Sometimes I've thought when I've been a bit hacked off, he was having a laugh, or he just wanted to make it more difficult. But I don't think so, not anymore. He knew what he was doing when he gave me the Deluminator, didn't he? He must have known I'd run out on you. No, he must have known you'd always want to come back. I'm a little disappointed the movie didn't include that. Harry also brings up the things Rita Skeeter wrote about Dumbledore, but Ron, like Hermione, chalks it up to Dumbledore being young, to which Harry again responds that he was their age. Meanwhile, Harry has been practicing with the new wand Ron gave him, which according to Hermione is made of blackthorn, and found that his results with it are far weaker than with his old wand. Hermione insists it shouldn't make a difference and that it's just a matter of confidence, but Harry, feeling the difference, knows better. Hermione evidently knows very little about how wands work, but in addition to that, I think she also wants it to work to ease her own sense of guilt over having cast the spell that destroyed Harry's wand in the first place. We don't see this in the movie, another case of Hermione being wrong cut out of them. Okay, in all honesty, I don't think that's why it was cut. They probably just didn't feel it was important, which is fair. It does kind of add to all the other instances of this, though. I think it's also worth mentioning that this is the first time in the books that we're introduced to the idea of a wizard's magic being affected by the wand they use. A plot point that will be really important in the end, and we learn it halfway through the final book. Okay, there was that hint in the first book where Ollivander says,
"The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter."
But I do feel like Rowling probably should have shown some examples here and there throughout the series of someone getting lesser results from another's wand. Again, something that could maybe be added if a TV series is made. So Hermione approaches Harry and Ron, though she pays no attention to the latter, with a surprising proposal.
I want to go and see Xenophilius Lovegood.
She shows Harry a page from Rita Skeeter's book showing a photograph of the actual letter she transcribed in the chapter they read earlier, where Dumbledore signed his name with that symbol again. Given how it keeps coming up and that they have no leads on the rest of the Horcruxes right now, Hermione wants to talk to Xenophilius about what it means, since he's the only living person they know who's associated with the symbol. Well, except for Grindelwald, but that probably wouldn't go so well. Harry in the book, not so much in the movie, is reluctant as he doesn't want to get sidetracked. Ironically, he's the only one who will get sidetracked by it. But Ron, hoping to get back into Hermione's good graces, immediately and hilariously agrees.
Those in favour?
So they head over to the Lovegood's house, which they recognize immediately.
Luna.
Surprisingly, despite his support of Harry and the Quibblers, Xenophilius doesn't seem particularly pleased to see them. He does let them in though, but is noticeably uncomfortable. In the book, Hermione is horrified to see the huge horn Xenophilius has on display, which he claims is a horn of a crumple-horned Snorkack, one of the non-existent creatures he and Luna are always talking about. Hermione, however, recognizes it as an Erempent horn, which can explode at the slightest touch, hence her horror that he would keep it around the house. And sure enough, this will end up destroying the house at the end of this scene. The trio also notice that Luna isn't there, even though it's still the Christmas holiday, so she should be home. In the book, Xenophilius says she's fishing in a nearby stream and goes out, supposedly to call her, but in reality it's to send a message to the Death Eaters that he's got Harry Potter. So when he comes back, they ask about the symbol, which he says is the sign of the Deathly Hallows, and that believers wear it to identify themselves to each other. When the trio continue to be confused, Xenophilius brings up the tale of the three brothers, which Ron and Hermione are familiar with, but Harry is not. Hermione reads it from the copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard that Dumbledore left her. Now, this whole sequence was done extremely well in the movie. The Tim Burton-style animation to show it all was a stroke of genius. I'll let it speak for itself, though.
Before they could cross, however, they found their path blocked by a hooded figure. It was Death, and he felt cheated. He pretended to congratulate the three brothers on their magic, and said that each had earned a prize for having been clever enough to evade him. The oldest asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence. The second brother decided he wanted to humiliate Death even further and asked for the power to recall loved ones from the grave. So Death plucked a stone from the river and offered it to him. Death turned to the third brother. A humble man, he asked for something that would allow him to go forth from that place without being followed by Death. And so it was that Death reluctantly handed over his own cloak of invisibility. The first brother traveled to a distant village. Drunk with the power that the Elder Wand had given him, he bragged of his invincibility. Another wizard stole the wand and slit the brother's throat for good measure. The second brother journeyed to his home, where he took the stone and turned it thrice in hand. To his delight, the girl he had once hoped to marry before her untimely death appeared before him. Yet soon she turned sad and cold, for she did not belong in the mortal world. The second brother killed himself so as to join her. As for the third brother, Death searched for many years but was never able to find him. Only when he attained a great age did the youngest brother shed the cloak of invisibility and give it to his son. He then greeted Death as an old friend and went with him gladly, departing this life as equals.
I think the story is really cool and a nice bit of world building, and the movie only enhanced it with these animations. I like how it's the brother who asked for the most humble of the gifts who ultimately lived a long, happy life. And as people have pointed out, the three brothers from the story are, in a way, represented in the actual story. The oldest brother is Voldemort, seeking power through the use of the Elder Wand. The middle brother is Snape, wanting to see his dead loved one again. And the youngest brother is Harry, welcoming death, who is represented by Dumbledore. So according to Xenophilius, the Deathly Hallows are the three objects from the story: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility. And if one can unite the three of them, they become Master of Death, whatever that means. Now in both versions, Hermione asks about the Peverell family and if they have anything to do with the story, seeing as the Deathly Hallows symbol was on Ignotus Peverell's grave in Godric's Hollow.
Ignotus, excuse me, and his brothers Cadmus and Antioch are thought to be the original owners of the Hallows and therefore the inspiration for the story.
In the movie, this is pretty much the extent of their discussion here. They talk about it more in the book, though. Remember, Xenophilius is trying to keep them there until the Death Eaters arrive. Also, unlike in the movie, Hermione is highly skeptical about the whole thing and makes very little effort to hide it. When talking about the invisibility cloak from the story, he points out that it's a cloak of true invisibility, whereas most you find in real life are simply ordinary cloaks enchanted with a disillusionment charm, or at the very least easily sustain damage and become useless. The one in the story, however, gives its wearer perfect invisibility. Of the Elder Wand, Xenophilius explains that it passes from owner to owner when it is won or captured from its previous owner, and goes over its blood-stained history, which I won't bother going into detail on here. Ultimately, as he says, its trail went cold long ago. After Xenophilius leaves the room, the trio get into a debate about which of the three Hallows would be the best to have. Harry thinks the Resurrection Stone, Ron thinks the Elder Wand, and Hermione thinks the Cloak. Ron accuses Hermione of just going along with the obvious moral of the story, and says that you wouldn't need to be invisible if you had an unbeatable wand. As Hermione points out, though, the wand would be bound to attract trouble, as it's unlikely you would be able to shut up about it if you had it. She also reinstates her belief that any stories of powerful wands are exaggerated, and that the wand is only as powerful as the wizard using it. She's wrong, of course, as she'll shortly learn. Harry's argument for the stone is, of course, so they could bring back all their loved ones who died, but as he remembers from the story, the stone didn't really bring people back to life, they were just a shadow. As Hermione dismisses the concept of the Elder Wand and Resurrection Stone as ridiculous, Ron points out that they do have proof of the existence of one of the Hallows, Harry's cloak. As he says, it's unlike any other invisibility cloak, as like the cloak in the story, it grants the wearer true invisibility and never seems to wear. Now, something I'm disappointed the movie never showed us is Luna's room. After the trio are done debating, Harry goes upstairs. In Luna's room, he finds a picture of her with her mother, and on the ceiling are pictures of him, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Neville, with the word friends written several times around them. That's really sweet. However, he also notices something odd. The room is really dusty, there are no clothes in the wardrobe, and the bed clearly hasn't been slept in. In other words, Luna hasn't been here in months. Xenophilius was lying. This is different from the movie, where the trio try to leave without suspecting anything and are stopped. Harry goes back downstairs and confronts Xenophilius. The trio find copies of the Quibbler, which are now pushing the Ministry propaganda rather than supporting Harry, and they realize Xenophilius sent for the Death Eaters, and that's when he admits the truth.
They were angry, you see, about what I'd been writing. So they took her. They took my goat.
So now he's hoping that if he hands Harry over, they might give Luna back. Harry, though angry about the betrayal, also seems to sympathize with him. He spread his arms in front of the staircase, and Harry had a sudden vision of his mother doing the same thing in front of his cot. Now, in the movie, Xenophilius summons the Death Eaters by saying Voldemort's name, which I think is kind of cool. Unfortunately, since they never established the taboo in the movie, it's not really clear that's what called them. In the book, as I mentioned, he wrote to them as soon as the trio arrived and has been killing time trying to keep them there. The movie also simplifies the Death Eaters' arrival and the trio's escape. In the movie, the Death Eaters simply destroy the house right away without even questioning him, and the trio disapparate right away. In the book, it's not even the Death Eaters who destroy the house. The trio notice the Death Eaters approaching, and Xenophilius takes advantage of their distraction to send a stunning spell at them. But they dodge it, and it hits the Erempin horn, blowing that section of the house apart. Xenophilius is knocked down the stairs by the force of the blast, and the two Death Eaters who arrived, Selwyn and Travers, accuse him of luring them there to blow them up and start torturing him. However, he insists that he has Harry Potter, and they order him to go upstairs and get him. "You can have your little girl, Lovegood, if you get up those stairs and bring me down Harry Potter. But if this is a plot, if it's a trick, if you've got an accomplice waiting up there to ambush us, we'll see if we can spare a bit of your daughter for you to bury." Hermione comes up with a plan. She covers Ron in the invisibility cloak, seeing as he's supposed to be sick at home, and as soon as Xenophilius appears, she wipes his memory and then blasts a hole in the floor. They land right next to the two Death Eaters and then disapparate. The reason for this, as Hermione explains, was to let the Death Eaters see Harry before they left, so they would know Xenophilius wasn't lying and hopefully not kill him. As we learn later, it worked. They simply imprisoned him in Azkaban. I've always liked this part because it shows how even good people can be driven to terrible acts in times of desperation or for the sake of their loved ones. Handing Harry over would have doomed the wizarding world, but at the same time, you can't blame Xenophilius for wanting to save his daughter at any cost. His wife is dead, so she's all he has left. Granted, I don't think Luna would have done the same if their positions were reversed. She's much closer with Harry personally, and I imagine would have seen the bigger picture more than her dad did. She probably wouldn't be too happy with him after learning what he did, but I can't see it affecting their relationship too much. I feel like she'd forgive him easily. And Harry probably would too. I like how the movie even shows him defending him a bit here.
Is there no one we can trust?
They kidnapped her because he supported me. He was just desperate.
Now, in the movie, the trio instantly encounter the Snatchers here. Well, that's a coincidence. They just happened to apparate right to where they were. On top of just the sheer coincidence of it, though, this doesn't even give the trio a chance to discuss the Deathly Hallows. You know, the name of the movie? Yeah, I've always had a problem with this part. In the book, after escaping, they put up the usual protective spells and the tent and start discussing what Xenophilius told them about the Hallows. Hermione is still convinced it's a load of crap, even though Ron points out that the invisibility cloak is very much real, and Harry even draws comparisons between the Resurrection Stone's effect and the figures he saw emerge from Voldemort's wand in the graveyard. Harry asks Hermione what she knows about the Peverell family, and all she knows is that they were one of the first pureblood families to have their name die out. They could still have descendants, but the name is dead. And at this, a memory comes back to Harry. When Harry saw the memory of Voldemort's grandfather, Marvolo Gaunt, he said he was descended from the Peverells, and that their coat of arms was on his ring, the ring that would become a Horcrux. This is where Harry realizes that the ring is in fact the Resurrection Stone. At this, Harry begins to imagine himself as Master of Death in possession of all three Hallows, thinking this might give him a chance to defeat Voldemort after all. And armed with this hope and certainty, he begins to figure a lot of things out. He realizes that the reason Dumbledore had the cloak the night his parents died was so he could examine it, as he knew it was the third Hallow. From this, he realizes that he is descended from Ignotus Peverell, the third brother, which is how the cloak got passed down to him. He then figures out that the Resurrection Stone is in the snitch, which means once he figures out how to open it, he'll have 2 of the Hallows. At this, however, he realizes something else, which lowers his spirits again. The Elder Wand is the thing Voldemort's after. Even after Harry says all of this, though, Hermione still doesn't believe any of it, and reminds Harry that they're supposed to be looking for the Horcruxes. Now, this is another situation, similar to Scabbers and the Half-Blood Prince, where Hermione is both right and wrong. She's wrong about the Deathly Hallows not existing, and as we'll see, everything Harry just figured out is completely correct. However, what Hermione is right about is that the Hallows are a distraction from their main goal, which is to destroy the Horcruxes. As we see over the next few weeks, Harry becomes obsessed with the idea of finding the Hallows and becoming Master of Death. Essentially, he's being tempted by power, and for now, he's falling for it. Yeah, he wants the power to help defeat Voldemort, but that's how it always starts, right? With good intentions? So as the other two are trying to think of places where the remaining Horcruxes might be and theorizing over who might have sent the dough, Harry continues to obsess over the Elder Wand, the only Hallow he does not have in his possession. He even accuses them of being obsessed with the Horcruxes, even though, as Hermione says, it's him who's obsessed. He does briefly feel ashamed of his obsession when he remembers that Luna has been captured and is imprisoned somewhere, but then his desire for the Elder Wand returns as it could help him rescue her. The one good thing about all of this is that Hermione's frustration with Harry and Xenophilius seems to have made her forget that she was furious with Ron. Speaking of whom, Ron actually kind of takes charge here, leading the search for the Horcruxes and coming up with ideas of where to look, even if some of them are a bit far-fetched. The fact that Harry's obsession over the Hallows isn't covered in the movies at all is one of my biggest problems. In a way, the Hallows are his ultimate test. He's being tempted by the idea of the greatest power in the wizarding world, and he already has 2 of the 3. Naturally, he wants to get a hold of the last one, and we, the audience, are highly tempted to want him to get it as well. This has to be the answer, right? Unite the Hallows and become Master of Death so he can defeat Voldemort? Well, the movie does nothing to dissuade us of that notion. But, as we will learn in the book, Harry isn't supposed to be fighting the Hallows, and Master of Death doesn't even mean dominance over death, it means greeting death as an equal, like the third brother in the story. Dumbledore wanted Harry to be tempted by this and ultimately turn away, counting on Hermione to hold him back. And Harry passes the test when he decides to prioritize finding the Horcruxes, despite knowing exactly where the Elder Wand is. As it turns out, letting Voldemort get the wand was exactly the right thing to do. In a sense, this is the culmination of everything Harry has gone through all throughout the series. He turns his back on power to focus on, as Dumbledore and Grindelwald put it, the greater good.
Shut it!
However, his version of the greater good is far truer and more selfless than theirs. His strength has never been in his magical ability. It's in his selflessness and his willingness to protect others. In other words, love. And this is why removing this from the movie is such a huge problem. We don't get so much as a hint that he's distracted from the hunt for the Horcruxes. Without this, what was Harry's arc? What is his struggle? It comes across more like he gets lucky in the end, when in truth, things turned out the way they did because of his decisions. Decisions only he could have made.